Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Kyrgyz humanitarian crisis may affect 1 million people. Battle between Turkey's military and government reignited. And left-wing Israelis protest Sheikh Jarrah's settlers. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
The United Nations said that around 1 million people who were displaced from southern Kyrgyzstan's conflict zones may need urgent help. The president of the interim Kyrgyz government, Rosa Otunbayeva, made her first visit to the city of Osh in southern Kyrgyzstan, where the violence led to about 190 deaths. From a refugee camp in neighboring Uzbekistan, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Robert Blake called for an investigation into the cause of the conflict.
According to the United Nations, more than 400,000 people from the Uzbek minority were displaced in the aftermath of the violent riots that swept across southern Kyrgyzstan. This constitutes about half of the entire Uzbek population that inhabits Kyrgyzstan's southern areas. Some refugees managed to cross the border, fleeing to Uzbekistan and staying in refugee camps there. Meanwhile, others are stuck in Kyrgyzstan amidst the chaos and destruction.
Is this justice? Our homes were destroyed, our children were killed, dead bodies are still everywhere.
Even though humanitarian aid from international relief organizations has started to arrive and ease the Uzbek suffering, the situation seems difficult to contain. Media reports indicate that diseases have started to spread in the refugee camps that were set up near the city of Osh, where the clashes that killed dozens and wounded hundreds took place. The Uzbek people were the most harmed during the violent riots, which many believe were caused by the ethnic tensions between the Uzbek minority and the Kyrgyz majority.
They kill our children and rape girls younger than 12 years old.
In the last several days, there have been intensive talks about rape in the city of Osh. Despite the lack of current and accurate information to indicate the extent of these crimes, human rights organizations have expressed their great concern over the situation.
I've documented one case so far. I talked to the woman who was raped, but it is clear that she was not the only one. There are many others. I can say that there are rape cases, but the question is the scale.
The government of Kyrgyzstan is still accusing the post-president, Kurmanbek Bakiev, of being behind the violent riots. The government believes that Bakiev's supporters are trying to obstruct the constitutional referendum that is scheduled to take place at the end of the month. However, the government explained that at the same time it is moving forward with the referendum, which is necessary for it to achieve legitimacy. Despite the meetings held by some Uzbek and Kyrgyz leaders attempting to put an end to the crisis and restore peace to southern Kyrgyzstan, it is still unclear which direction the country's political scene will be headed in. Sally Nabil, BBC.
وكما في العناوين نبدأ من تركيا حيث قررت الدائرة المختصة في محكمة التمييز العليا التركية إطلاق.
The Turkish Court of Appeals decided to release all defendants charged with participating in the Ergenekon organization's plan to topple the Turkish government.
الحكومة بالتخطيط لمحاولة انقلابية.
Political observers say that the court's decision comes within the context of the power struggle between the secularists and the government. The Court of Appeals in Ankara ordered the release of İlhan Sihaner, the chief prosecutor, who was also accused of participating in the plan to topple the government.
Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan accused the Court of Appeals of violating the constitution by intervening in the case of the Ergenekon organization and for issuing verdicts in cases that do not fall under its jurisdiction. These cases ought to be looked into by the civic courts in Istanbul, Rostrum, and Ankara.
Erdogan added that the Court of Appeals decided to punish a number of judges who arrested civil and military officials in relation to Ergenekon's plan to topple the government. Erdogan said that the judicial system has lost its credibility because it has been issuing politically motivated verdicts in violation of the country's laws. Joining us from Ankara is Al Jazeera correspondent Omar Kashran.
Omar, what kind of reactions were generated by the Court of Appeals decision? Is this just another chapter in the power struggle between the government, led by the Justice and Development Party, and the secularists that include the Appeals Court and the army?
Abdul Qadir, I will start where you ended. Yes, indeed, this is a new chapter in the power struggle between the secularist camp, represented by the judicial system, the army, the People's Republican Party on one side, and the government on the other, which is accused of having Islamic orientation and of trying to establish an Islamic state in Turkey. However, what is worth mentioning is that the courts of appeals cannot, legally speaking, make a decision in a case that is being deliberated by a lower-level court. This is the consensus that was reached by many legal experts in Turkish universities. The exceptions are some secular legal experts who say that the appeals court has the right to protect the secular system, even if it goes beyond its jurisdiction. Of course, because other Turkish officials are deliberating this case, the appeals court does not have the legal jurisdiction to release the defendants, who are accused of participating in an attempted coup. According to the court in Erzurum, there is strong evidence that implicates them. Therefore, the government is afraid that other courts may use this as a precedent for similar decisions in the future, such as the Supreme Court or the Constitutional Court. There is fear that these courts will also go beyond their jurisdiction and justify it with the need to protect the secularist nature of the judicial system. So far, the reactions have been those of condemnation of the Court of Appeals decision, which has still not commented on the decision nor explained the reasons behind it. In addition, the appeals court did not explain the reasons for which it violated its jurisdiction and interfered in two cases that are being deliberated in different courts. Some legal experts expect some courts to object to the Supreme Court, demanding the detention of the individuals who were released based on the decision of the court in Ankara. We will wait to see what happens, but apparently there is a political struggle inside the judicial system and is being carried out between the judicial bodies. Some are accused of being secularists, while others are accused of being loyal to the government.
Thank you, Omar Kashran from Ankara.
Every Friday, hundreds of Israeli left-wing activists hold a demonstration in solidarity with the Palestinians who were forced to leave their homes in East Jerusalem in the infamous neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Of course, they are protesting the settlement policy. Our colleague Ziad Halabi has more details.
أصبحت تظاهرات اليسار الإسرائيلي كل أسبوع في الشيخ جراح.
They take place every week. The Israeli left-wing demonstrations have become a distinguished feature of this neighborhood. Dozens of activists, sometimes hundreds, come here to protest the settlement policy at a time when the Israeli left appears to have been marginalized in the face of the right's domination. The demonstrations also take place at a time when public and official Palestinian demonstrations have decreased.
These people come every Friday from 3 to 6 p.m. to protest. and their number keeps on growing. As you can see, the people who participate in these demonstrations are not simple people. They're academics from the Hebrew University. They have their own views in regards to the settlements in East Jerusalem.
Although their number is small and their influence negligible, the Israeli left is becoming a nuisance to its government, at least when it comes to Sheikh Jarrah, where the settlers have been in control through their seizure of one home after the other. The activists generate media attention. In this neighborhood, one can see three contradictory forces in one scene. It includes Palestinians, settlers, and left-wing demonstrators. All of them are waiting for the upcoming battle over the control of the next house, currently manipulated by Israeli security forces. Ziad Halabi, Al Arabiya, occupied Jerusalem.
على حالها ظلت يوميات الغازيين مع الإغلاق والحصار.
People in Gaza are still living under the same conditions of closure and siege. The Israeli decision to ease the siege in Gaza yesterday did not have much of an effect on the ground. This was the statement that was issued by Rahed Fatuha, the coordinator of the flow of goods into Gaza. He added that Israel continued its closure of the Karam Abu Salem and El Mintar crossing points on Friday and Saturday. He pointed out that they may be open the day after tomorrow, on Sunday.
مشيرا إلى أنهما قد يفتحان بعد غد الأحد. فتوح أوضح أن الاحتلال سمح أمس بعبور نحو 230.
Fatuha announced that the occupation has allowed 230 trucks carrying supplies to enter Gaza, as well as solar electricity generating systems. The new Israeli list of products allowed to enter Gaza includes food, toys, and office and kitchen supplies. However, construction material will still be banned from entering Gaza.
فيما سيظل الحظر ساريا على استيراد مواد البناء. ردود الفعل على القرار الإسرائيلي لم تتأخر. فلسطينيا وصف
Reactions to the Israeli decision were quickly generated. The Palestinians said that the Israeli decision is useless and mere propaganda, saying that what is needed is a complete end to the siege. In addition, the Turkish Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that his government wants to evaluate the Israeli decision. However, he said that Ankara expects a complete end to the siege. The White House welcomed the Israeli decision, saying that it's a step in the right direction.
خطوة في الاتجاه الصحيح. أما الاتحاد الأوروبي فأعرب عن أمله في الحصول على شرح تفصيلي.
However, the European Union said that it hopes to obtain a detailed explanation of the Israeli decision. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said that the Israeli decision is encouraging, but that radical change is needed.
الحصار على قطاع غزة كان حاضرا في رام الله. الوجه الذي أخذتها.
Meanwhile, the US envoy to the Middle East, George Mitchell, met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah. The visit came within the framework of his mission to mediate the peace talks between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
في المفاوضات غير المباشرة الفلسطينية الإسرائيلية. كما في اللقاء الذي.
Prior to going to Ramallah, George Mitchell had met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. George Mitchell left the West Bank without issuing any statements.
بأي تصريح.
Amnesty International has accused Israel of inhumane treatment of nuclear whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu. He's now in prison for meeting with a foreigner, which is against one of the conditions for his release. Amnesty says he's being held in solitary confinement in a detention unit intended for violent criminals. Vanunu opted for community service but was forced to settle for jail time when the Supreme Court requested his request to serve in East Jerusalem Al-Quds. Vanunu said he feared harassment from the mainly Israeli population in West Jerusalem Al-Quds. Vanunu is a former nuclear technician who served 18 years for leaking the inner workings of Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons program. He spent 11 years in solitary confinement.
By the Israeli state, by the Israeli court, this judge today said that I said Israel has atomic weapons, and he finds me guilty of saying this truth. So you and everyone in the world can say that Israel have atomic weapons, they have plutonium, neutron bomb, and hydrogen bomb. It is writing here.
Iran has dismissed a new sanctions resolution by the UN Security Council over its nuclear energy program.
Tehran has warned in a statement that it will take appropriate measure to counter any move against its national interests. And Iran's Supreme National Security Council calls the UN Security Council's involvement in the standoff over Tehran's nuclear program illegal. It also describes the issue as a breach of the IAEA's obligations. Tehran now calls on the Security Council to make up for its past mistakes. Iran also says the sanctions resolution is based on groundless allegations. Tehran says the Security Council's sanctions resolution, which followed Iran, Brazil, and Turkey's nuclear fuel swap declaration and Israel's deadly attack on the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, proves that the Security Council isn't an appropriate forum where world nations' security and rights are maintained. The Iranian SNSC's statement also refers to Washington's failure in winning support from all Security Council members to impose sanctions against Iran. It says the United States is facing an increasing credibility crisis and says Washington's slogan of change will not restore the U.S. government's lost credibility. Tehran also blasts what it calls Washington's insistence on continuing its old wrong policies toward Iran and calls the U.S. the biggest threat to the international community.
The United States is the principal offender in using, proliferating, producing, and testing nuclear weapons and poses the biggest threat to the international community and mostly its own people. How can a regime that is unable to contain an oil spill be trusted to contain its nuclear weapons armories that jeopardize global security?
Iran also describes the UN sanctions resolution as part of U.S. attempts to divert attention from its own nuclear arsenal.
It has proven that the United States tries to distract and redirect world public opinion from real threats by concocting made-up and fictitious threats. The real threats are the direct results of flawed policies by the American regime in stockpiling nuclear weapons and supporting state terrorism.
The statement also says the Islamic Republic considers the Tehran Declaration brokered by Iran, Brazil, and Turkey as an appropriate basis to boost unity and interaction among independent states. This to maintain peace, justice, and prosperity.
The Mauritanian opposition took to the streets of the capital Nouakchott to protest what it referred to as the country's political and economic deterioration. Opposition leader Ahmed Weld Dada criticized Mauritanian President Mohamed Weld Abdelaziz and described his regime as tyrannical and corrupt. Weld Dada also accused the president of failing to take serious steps for dialogue with the opposition. In response, the loyalists described Weld Dada's remarks as prejudice and slander against the government.
Led by opposition leaders and key figures, demonstrators mobilized in the main street in the center of the Mauritanian capital, Nouakchott. Through this public mobilization, the opposition is seeking to draw attention to what it referred to as a serious deterioration at all levels. The opposition sent several political messages, both at the internal and external fronts.
إلى الداخل والخارج. رسالة واضحة موجهة للشعب الموريتاني للحكام.
This is a clear message by the Mauritanian people to their government and leaders. This is the people's choice, which the government has rejected.
The Mauritanian opposition, represented by its historical leader, Ahmed Weld Dada, described President Mohamed Weld Abdelaziz as a dictator and as arrogant. Weld Dada also accused his 2009 presidential rival, Abdelaziz, of not being serious about holding talks with the opposition.
The opposition was the one to propose the dialogue. Dialogue is the civilized way to achieve stability and salvage the country. It's in the country's interest, that's why we proposed it. However, we have not received any response from the government of Mohamed Abdelaziz. We have informed the president that we're willing to start a dialogue with his cabinet.
Speakers at the rally reiterated that the living conditions of Mauritanians continue to turn from bad to worse. Loyalists described the allegations cited by the opposition as slander and prejudice.
It's an attempt by the opposition to mislead the public and distort the facts. President Mohammed Weld Abdelaziz has achieved in 1 year what his predecessors have failed to achieve in half a century. The first one to believe in the president was the leader of the opposition, Weld Dada. Also, it was Weld Dada, not the president, who rejected the dialogue.
The opposition wants to show the strong influence it has on the internal front, especially amidst the dire economic situation in the country. In response, the Mauritanian regime reiterated that the situation requires actions and not words.
The U.S. imposes more sanctions on Iran. Iranian President Ahmadinejad remains defiant. Are sanctions enough to stop Iran's nuclear program? And who will pay the price?
Answers to these questions and more on Link TV's Mosaic Intelligence Report.
The U.S. Treasury has recently expanded its blacklist on Iran to include another state-controlled bank, a shipping line, and more of its elite Revolutionary Guard Corps. The latest move is the first step by the United States in implementing new restrictions adopted by the United Nations Security Council last week. The Treasury also took a separate step to squeeze Iran's energy sector by identifying some 20 petroleum and petrochemical companies as being under Iranian government control, an action that puts them off limits to the United States businesses under a general trade embargo.
Iran will never cease looking for ways to evade our sanctions, so our efforts must be ongoing and unrelenting.
On Wednesday, Iran announced that it will build 4 new reactors to expand its atomic research. It denies Western allegations that it is seeking atomic weapons, insisting that it only wants to develop the peaceful use of nuclear energy.
We will soon announce our conditions for the resumption of talks. First, they must talk to us in a polite and respectful way. Our nation will make you regret your latest decision. We hereby warn any country, anywhere in the world, that if it tries to harm the Iranian nation under the pretext of implementing the sanctions, we will respond accordingly and forcefully.
The Obama administration says the goal of the punitive measures is to deter Tehran from its nuclear enrichment program. Will these sanctions further that goal? Not really. Lest we forget, the sanctions that were passed at the United Nations have been watered down during negotiations with Russia and China, rendering them practically ineffective. The additional sanctions by the United States and the ones planned by the EU have no crippling effect on Iran's economy and do not entail an oil embargo. Sanctions can be effective only if they threaten the regime's survival, and since these sanctions are all based on Iran's nuclear energy program and not human rights, they remain ineffective. The vast majority of Iranians support their government's nuclear enrichment policies. Additional sanctions will most likely come at the expense of the poorest and most vulnerable, as they did in Iraq from August 1991 through March 1998.
Sanctions will most probably lead to the suffering of the people of Iran and will play in the hands of those on all sides that do not want dialogue to prevail.
According to the Brazilian ambassador to the United Nations, Brazil, along with Turkey, voted against the draft resolution of the United Nations Security Council to impose new sanctions against Iran. Furthermore, the sanctions would allow Tehran to blame outsiders for its economic woes. In fact, the sanctions will do Iran a favor that the Iranian government can do for itself. As for making a dent in Iran's import-export traffic of energy products, the sanctions will have little effect. Turkey has indicated it plans to increase its imports of natural gas from Iran. Also, according to the Wall Street Journal, oil traders and oil industry analysts say that Iran will have little trouble finding other gasoline supplies in the Persian Gulf, where a black market in fuel products thrives, even if Washington passes measures that would penalize firms or individuals with business in the United States that supply gasoline to Iran. Captain Musa Murad, General Manager of the United Arab Emirates port of Fujairah, says gasoline sanctions will likely give a lift to a thriving black market fuel trade in the Gulf. The region has no shortage of suppliers, he says, who will continue to hide gasoline shipments to Iran because prices will go up 2 times, maybe 3 times. What options does the United States have? Those who are anxious to stop Iran's nuclear program keep reminding us that the military option is still on the table. For years, the United States has tried to stop India and Pakistan from joining the nuclear club and briefly turned off aid to them. Today, it works secretly with Pakistan to secure its nuclear arsenal and has signed a treaty with India permitting it to buy nuclear material. The United States option might be no option. I'm Jamal Dajani for the Mosaic Intelligence Report.
To learn more about this program or to share your thoughts, visit us at linktv.org/me. Stay up to date on the Middle East. Follow Jamal at twitter.com/Jamal Dajani. The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible from support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news. Read our blog. Get transcripts of past shows and more at linktv.org/Mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs, programs which connect you to the world.